It's like feather light. A little button ASMR for you. I think I would much prefer to have these light keys. Hello and welcome to another NihongoGamer video. Very excited because in this box, I have ordered some new switches. You can put them in this controller. This is the Junk Food Arcades Snack Box microcontroller, which I made a video about last year. I've been using this controller a lot, not just because it feels nice, but mostly because it's small. The switches that come in this controller are apparently 50-gram switches, and I think that's quite standard for a mechanical keyboard. It means that it needs a bit of force to press them so you don't accidentally actuate them when you rest your fingers on them. But apparently these switches are 25 grams. That makes them half as much required pressure to actuate. And I'm a little bit nervous because if lighter switches means that if I rest my fingers on the keys, I can accidentally actuate them. I'm a little bit nervous about that because I do kind of rest my fingers on the left keys, although I kind of hover my finger over the switches for the right keys. And the reason I say that is because when you're doing your movement, like left, right, that you're doing so much of it and holding your fingers down so long that you find yourself often resting your fingers on these keys, even though you're kind of rocking back and forth. Let's see if we can swap them into the Snackbox Micro and see how they feel. I've actually never done this before, and as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws that need to be removed first, and apparently we can just pop the switches out from the back and they'll just pop out the front. I've got my dollar store screwdriver here. Let's see if we can get these screws open. Okay, I need something smaller. Here we go, maybe something more like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one here, 5 screws. Done. So let's see what it actually looks like on the inside. Oh, very interesting. Getting a nice little inside look at the Snackbox Micro. This is the base plate, which you can replace with the heavy metal base plate in case you find that the stick's not heavy enough for you or if it slips around in your lap. Really, this controller is just a PCB with a bunch of switches stuck into it. But because it's got this nice casing, obviously you can rest it on your lap. On the PCB, it's got these hot swap switches, and that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking these, which are the Kailh blue 25-gram choc. I believe they're V1 switches, so have to be careful not to break the pins on them. This is actually what we're going to be putting into the stick today. The other thing that I'm worried about with very light switches, I'm going to break them, with very light switches, is that maybe they'll return more slowly than heavier switches, because obviously the springier they are, the faster they're going to return, but we shall see. I'm very nervous about these switches. All right, let's just use the screwdriver, I guess, and just pop these switches out. I believe you just push on this round area here in the middle. Oh, and it's popped out. Nice. Got to be careful it doesn't bend these pins on the way out. I don't want to break the switch. Let's see if we can do this nice and carefully. Okay. There was no breakage, thank goodness. If you've never seen one of the switches that comes with a Snackbox Micro, it's this one. It is a red Kailh choc switch, and apparently it is 50 grams of actuation force. I'm going to line up 3 of these light blue switches. So to use the top and the right corner, we're going to have the switch aligned like this with the bump facing up, I believe, and the button cap going on now like so. Nice and secure. Let's just a little bit quick press to see how it feels. Oh, that is light. Making sure that the pins are in the right place, top and the right corner. Putting it in here first. Being very careful not to break the pins. Okay. Whoa. It's like feather light. You barely know that you've actually pressed a button at all. Going to place this in the correct position without breaking the pin. Right, placing the final button into the stick like so. I still call it a stick even though there's no stick. And just in case you're interested, you can actually see the color of the switches through the back of the controller because you can see the color of the plastic on the base of these switches. Look, red switches look like they just have black plastic bases, but these new blue switches, you can actually see the blue of the plastic on the switch. All right, we've got 3 of these light blue switches plugged into the Snackbox Micro here. Now, I've still got the original heavy switches for my movement, which I think is actually going to be where these switches feel the nicest, is if I swap the light switches into the movement. But for the actual action buttons, Wow, it does feel light. Interesting, because I often come down on the button with quite a lot of force and speed from high up. So it's going to feel a little bit different as I try to use a much lighter touch and actually slam on these buttons a little bit less, with less aggression and speed from high up. Because in a way, with these light switches, I don't need to come down quite so quickly or with as much speed. It doesn't feel hugely different in the middle of a combo, like swapping between these buttons, because there's punches in here. There's punches in here, and then there's a kick. Some people actually play like a keyboard. They like to rest their fingers on the keys and use all of the muscles of their fingers only. Personally, I'm more of a combination of finger muscles and arm movement as well. For people like me, maybe it's not quite as noticeable. I really do think that it's going to make much more of a difference after I've swapped it into the direction buttons as well. Okay, so back here on the operating table, time to replace all of these switches with these light blue switches. And maybe I'll just leave a couple of these ones over here to be the heavy ones, just so I can use them for reference. 1, 2, 3, 4, the jump button here. So let's remove these button caps from these 50-gram switches. When I heard 3D printed button cap, I was like, ugh, I'm nervous, but actually they seem to be fairly resilient. All right, so these are the button caps, and these are the red switches. I'm going to swap them out for a bunch of these light blue ones. A little button ASMR for you. Make sure the pins are in the top right. 1. So, whoa! That is... Wow, it feels like I'm playing on paper. That's interesting. You know where this feels like it makes the most difference is on your pinky finger, which I think, generally speaking, most people probably use this finger the least, especially for fighting games. You're usually using mostly just your index and middle fingers for double tapping and stuff, or you're using these main 3. But I don't know that many players. I do know a few, but I don't know that many players who use their pinky. All right, so as you can see, I've got all of these blue switches except for the final 2. Let's actually see how it feels in game. Okay, that is significantly different. When you only have a few of these buttons here, you don't notice it as much because it's just like you're only pressing those buttons when you're doing a combo with those buttons in them. But when you switch out all the buttons for these super light switches, wow! And it doesn't feel slow at all. My main worry was that it's going to feel slower as a result because they're not going to spring back that quickly. It feels less springy because they're not really pushing up on your hands. When you're done pressing the button, it doesn't push your finger back up as heavily, so you don't feel it coming up. You can see it's not coming up any slower than before. I feel like speed-wise, it looks like it comes back totally fast. There's no need to worry about like the speed of it coming back up. Now it takes less force to press on them, and the only thing I would say is that maybe you can't really rest your fingers on them as lightly. I think if you're the type of person that plays this a bit like a keyboard, like you're typing an essay, maybe you'd like to rest your fingers on it and just play like this. But personally, I feel like that's kind of bad for your fingers, and you're likely to end up with muscle strain if you leave your fingers resting on the keys. However, I do realize that a lot of people do it and they seem to be just fine. I prefer to have my fingers above the keys a little bit so that I can take advantage of the speed that you get from using your entire hand and arm motion to increase the force, of course, by increasing the acceleration of the movement into the buttons. Now, although it does feel nicer on my right hand, obviously, to do combos, I don't feel like in a game like Street Fighter, I'm feeling like this is the most dramatic part of the change. The most dramatic part of the change here is definitely over here on the motion buttons. Now, you feel it on your right thumb as well. It's not a touch screen, but it definitely feels really light. And again, if you don't need to rest your fingers on the keys, I think I would much prefer to have these light keys. As you can see, I can't really take advantage of my arm movement to give myself more acceleration and more force when pressing these keys. Often I have to rely on just the rotation of my wrist or just the muscles of only the fingers. And for that reason, playing on a button box style controller, you often, I feel the strain more immediately in your left hand, because even if you want to lift your hand up, you can't, because you're pressing the keys, you're holding them down for so long that you don't really have the time to lift your left hand up off the controller. The most dramatic difference I'm feeling is on the direction side. Man, is it a difference. Alright, what test would be complete without trying out some Under Night in Birth? Now you have to do a lot of hand gymnastics for a character like Seth because a lot of his combos just involve a whole lot of unnecessary button pressing, but that's why I think the character is a lot of fun to play. That is absolutely incredible. I'm not gonna lie, the difference is subtle if you haven't played with a lot of controllers before. If you buy your first controller ever with 25-gram switches or with 50-gram switches, you are most likely not going to notice the difference. But if you play fighting games for hours and hours a day, and you play with a character that has all of these totally unnecessary motions in their combos, like a character like Seth does, then you're going to really appreciate not having to slam down or push hard to keep the button held down. So especially for characters like Seth, if you do something like this, you go straight through the enemy, but if you hold it down like this, you end up doing a completely different move which goes and actually kind of hits them in the middle of the combo. So especially for games like Under Night in Birth or characters like Seth where you're holding down buttons to do different variations of the moves, you're really going to appreciate not having to press as much with as much force for long extended periods of time, because with this you can just be pressing ever so feather light with your fingers and everything still comes out. For something this inexpensive, this is really blowing me away. How big a difference it makes to this controller. It's like if you were offered two different tiers of controller, like a $200 controller and a $300 controller. I can imagine people opting to pay $100 extra. I don't think that's how much it's worth, but I can imagine a business tactic where people actually bought the $100 extra controller just to have the extra light switches because it just feels better for competitive play. With these switches, I think I paid $20 and I got 20 switches. I think I got 20 switches for 20, so it was like $1 per switch. There's 12 buttons on this controller, and that means it costs you $12 to completely transform this into a weapon, basically. It just feels like a weapon now. Listen up, that is all for the testing of these Kailh 25-gram light blue switches, which I've put into the Snack Box Micro. The reason these switches work is because they are low-profile switches. They're called the choc V1, and I believe Kailh makes two different versions, choc V1 and choc V2, but what you want is the version 1. I am blown away by the difference it makes to the directions. Honestly speaking, I don't notice the difference as much for the buttons on the right. So if you were so inclined, you could just have lighter switches for the directions only and maybe the jump button as well, and then leave heavier switches for the action buttons. Or you could just do what I've done, which is replace basically all the switches except for these last two with the light switches, and that makes it feel a little bit more uniform overall. One thing that does happen when you switch to a button box style controller like this is that you're holding down the directions on your left hand harder than you realized was necessary. And in particular, you find that you're holding down a button while other fingers are lifted up. So on your action buttons, often you can just lift your whole hand up and then come back down to press the button. But on the direction side, even though you've lifted your right finger off the button, you can't lift your whole hand up. You've got to leave your one finger down or two fingers down or a combination of other fingers while one finger is up in the air and the other fingers are held down with pressure. For those direction buttons especially, you want to have as low actuation force as is required while also, you know, continuing to spring up fast enough. But moreover, just the Snack Box Micro, very easy to mod. Literally never had done that before in my life. Just got the screwdriver out, poked the switches out, put them back in. Finally, all I want to say is I got them on AliExpress and they cost like $1 each. Sometimes people complain about controllers being like, oh, the controller's $300, it's so expensive. It's like, yeah, compared to every other hobby on earth, fight sticks is kind of a cheap hobby. The only thing is it's a bit like owning a guitar. Once you own one guitar, you need to have a separate guitar for every different song that you play. If you want to see how my opinions change over time, do pop into a live stream every now and then. BlazBlue Central Fiction, maybe a bit of Under Night in Birth, Guilty Gear Strive, Street Fighter 5, all the fighting games that I like to play on the Twitch stream. So do follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter if you haven't already, and please do join us on the Discord, because we are putting a concerted effort into making the Discord server a rewarding and fun, exciting place for you all to hang out. There's thousands of you already on it. Click the Discord invite link below to join us. Until the next NihongoGamer video and or stream, I'll see you around.